In a grand kingdom of Aldermere, where ancient traditions run as deep as the mountain rivers and royal bloodlines are guarded more fiercely than state secrets, a single piece of jewelry would ignite a scandal that would shake the very foundations of the crown. Commander Marcus Blackwood had served the royal family for 23 years, his loyalty as unwavering as the stone walls of Aldermere Castle. He had protected 3 generations of royals, witnessed births, deaths, marriages, and divorces within the palace walls. He had seen secrets that could topple governments and heard whispers that could destroy reputations. But nothing had prepared him for the moment he would spot the sapphire ring of Aldermere, a precious heirloom belonging to Princess Charlotte, gleaming on the finger of Lady Evangeline, the stepdaughter of Queen Consort Isabella. The ring wasn't just jewelry. It was a symbol of royal heritage, passed down through generations of Aldermere princesses, each stone carefully selected to represent the kingdom's prosperity and the bearer's rightful place in the line of succession. When Commander Blackwood's trained eyes caught the unmistakable glint of those sapphires during a state dinner, his world shifted on its axis. What followed would be an explosion of anger so fierce, so unprecedented from the usually composed royal guard, that would expose decades of hidden rivalries, carefully buried family secrets, and a web of manipulation that reached the highest echelons of power. This is the story of how one ring revealed the fault lines in a royal family, and how a loyal guard's moment of fury changed the course of a kingdom's history forever. The question that would haunt the halls of Aldermere Castle was simple yet devastating. How did a ring meant for a blood princess end up on the finger of a step-family member? And what lengths would people go to keep that secret buried? The morning sun cast long shadows across the marble floors of Aldermere Castle as Commander Marcus Blackwood made his usual rounds through the royal quarters. At 45, Marcus possessed the bearing of a man who had dedicated his life to service. Broad shoulders that carried the weight of responsibility, sharp eyes that missed nothing, and hands that had never trembled in the face of danger. His uniform, pristine as always, bore the golden insignia of the Royal Guard, a position he had earned through years of unwavering dedication to the crown. The castle was preparing for the annual Harvest Festival celebration, an event that drew nobility from across the kingdom to honor the season's bounty and strengthen political alliances. Servants hurried through corridors carrying arrangements of autumn flowers, while kitchen staff prepared elaborate feasts that would feed hundreds of guests. The air buzzed with anticipation and the underlying tension that always accompanied royal gatherings. Marcus paused at the portrait gallery, where paintings of past monarchs gazed down with expressions ranging from benevolent to stern. King Edmund III, the current ruler, had commissioned this gallery to remind visitors of the weight of history that rested upon the royal family. Among these portraits hung a special display case containing replicas of the crown jewels, including the famous sapphire ring of Aldermere. The original ring had been crafted 3 centuries earlier for Queen Isabella I, a legendary ruler who had expanded the kingdom's borders and established many of the traditions that still governed royal life. The ring featured 7 perfectly cut sapphires arranged around a central diamond, each stone representing one of the 7 provinces under Aldermere's rule. It had been passed down through generations of royal women, worn by queens and princesses during significant ceremonies and state occasions. Marcus knew the ring's history well. As head of security for royal events, he was responsible for ensuring the safety of all royal artifacts and jewelry. He had personally overseen the ring's transport to and from various ceremonies, had watched Princess Charlotte wear it during her coming-of-age celebration just 2 years earlier. The ring was more than jewelry to the royal family. It was a symbol of legitimacy, of the unbroken chain of succession that gave the monarchy its authority. Princess Charlotte, now 21, was King Edmund's only daughter from his first marriage to Queen Margaret, who had died in a riding accident when Charlotte was just 12. The princess had inherited her mother's grace and her father's determination, along with a fierce independence that sometimes worried the palace staff. She was beloved by the common people for her charitable work and her refusal to conform to all royal expectations. But this same spirit had created tension within the royal household. 3 years after Queen Margaret's death, King Edmund had married Isabella Rothschild, a widow from a prominent noble family who brought her teenage daughter, Evangeline, into the royal household. The marriage had been politically advantageous, cementing alliances between the crown and several powerful noble houses. But it had also introduced complicated family dynamics into the previously tight-knit royal family. Queen Consort Isabella was an elegant woman with a keen political mind, but her relationship with Princess Charlotte had always been strained. The princess had never fully accepted her stepmother, viewing her as an outsider who could never replace her beloved mother. Evangeline, now 19, had initially tried to build a friendship with Charlotte, but the age difference and Charlotte's resistance had eventually led to a polite but distant relationship between the two young women. Marcus had observed these family tensions during his years of service, but he maintained his professional distance. His job was to protect the royal family, not to involve himself in their personal relationships. However, he couldn't help but notice the subtle ways these tensions played out during public events. The careful spacing between family members during photographs, the diplomatic but cool exchanges between Charlotte and her stepfamily, the way conversations stopped when certain people entered rooms. As he continued his morning inspection, Marcus encountered Lady Evangeline in the East Wing corridor. She was dressed in an emerald silk gown that complemented her auburn hair and green eyes, clearly preparing for the day's festivities. Evangeline had grown into a beautiful young woman during her time at the palace, and she had learned to navigate royal protocols with grace, even if she would never have an official place in the line of succession. "Good morning, Commander Blackwood," Evangeline said with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "The castle looks magnificent for the celebration." "Indeed, my lady," Marcus replied with a respectful bow. "Security arrangements are complete. It should be a successful evening." As Evangeline lifted her hand to adjust a strand of hair, the morning sunlight caught something on her finger that made Marcus's blood freeze. There, unmistakably gleaming on the fourth finger of her right hand, was the sapphire ring of Aldermere. The 7 sapphires caught the light in a way that was burned into Marcus's memory from years of guarding the peace during ceremonies. The setting, the size of the stones, the particular way the central diamond reflected light, there was no mistaking it. Marcus felt his professional composure crack for just a moment. How was this possible? The ring was supposed to be secured in the royal vault, only brought out for special occasions when worn by Princess Charlotte or, in rare circumstances, by Queen Consort Isabella during state functions. Evangeline, despite her position in the royal household, had no claim to wear any of the hereditary royal jewels. The ring represented a bloodline that she was not part of, a heritage that was not hers to display. "My lady," Marcus said carefully, his training helping him maintain an even tone despite the storm brewing inside him. "That's a beautiful ring you're wearing." Evangeline glanced down at her hand, and for just a second, Marcus caught something in her expression. Was it guilt? Fear? The emotion passed so quickly he might have imagined it. "Oh, this old thing," she said with what sounded like forced casualness. "Isabella gave it to me for the celebration. She thought it would complement my gown beautifully." The explanation hit Marcus like a physical blow. Queen consort Isabella had given the sapphire ring of Aldermere to her daughter, the ring that belonged to the royal bloodline, that had been worn by queens and princesses for 3 centuries, had been casually bestowed upon someone with no royal blood. The implications were staggering. Marcus's mind raced through the protocols and procedures that governed royal jewelry. Each piece had specific rules about who could wear it and when. The sapphire ring was restricted to female members of the royal bloodline, typically the queen or the heir apparent's daughter. Queen consort Isabella, while married to the king, was not technically entitled to pass royal heirlooms to her biological daughter, especially not without consulting Princess Charlotte or the king himself. "I see," Marcus managed to say, though inside he was anything but calm. "Well, it certainly does compliment your gown, my lady." Evangeline smiled again, but Marcus caught the slight tension around her eyes. "Thank you, Commander. I should go find the queen consort." She wanted to review the seating arrangements for tonight's dinner. As Evangeline walked away, her heels clicking on the marble floor, Marcus stood frozen in the corridor. 23 years of service had taught him to handle crises with calm professionalism, but this situation was unlike anything he had ever encountered. The unauthorized transfer of royal jewelry wasn't just a breach of protocol. It was a violation of centuries of tradition and, potentially, a crime against the crown. His first instinct was to report the matter immediately to King Edmund, but Marcus forced himself to think through the implications carefully. If Queen consort Isabella had indeed given the ring to Evangeline without proper authorization, it would create a scandal that could destabilize the royal family. The public perception of the monarchy depended on the careful maintenance of traditions and protocols. Any suggestion that royal artifacts were being distributed casually to non-royal family members could damage the crown's authority. On the other hand, if there was a legitimate explanation, if the king had authorized the transfer, or if there were circumstances Marcus didn't understand, then raising an alarm could embarrass the royal family and potentially cost Marcus his position. He had seen other long-serving staff members dismissed for overstepping their bounds, even when their intentions were good. Marcus made his way to his office in the security wing of the castle, his mind churning with questions and possibilities. His office was a study in organized efficiency. Maps of the castle grounds covered one wall, security schedules and protocols filled filing cabinets, and a bank of monitors displayed feeds from cameras throughout the palace. This room was his command center, the place where he coordinated the protection of the royal family and their property. He pulled out the inventory logs for royal jewelry, thick binders that documented every piece in the collection and tracked their whereabouts during official events. The sapphire ring of Aldermere was listed as secured in Vault 7, the highest security storage area reserved for the most valuable hereditary pieces. According to the log, the ring had last been worn by Princess Charlotte during the spring equinox ceremony 6 months earlier, and it had been returned to the vault the following day. There was no record of the ring being checked out for the Harvest Festival celebration. No authorization forms, no security clearance, no documentation whatsoever that would explain how the ring had ended up on Evangeline's finger. The absence of paperwork was almost as troubling as the ring's unauthorized appearance. Marcus leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling as he wrestled with his options. His loyalty to the royal family was absolute, but that loyalty extended to protecting the institution of the monarchy, not just the individual members of the royal family. If Queen consort Isabella was overstepping her authority and treating royal artifacts as personal property to be distributed to her biological children, then she was threatening the very traditions that gave the monarchy its legitimacy. The sound of approaching footsteps in the corridor outside his office broke Marcus's concentration. Through his window, he could see servants carrying silver platters and floral arrangements toward the great hall, reminding him that in just a few hours, hundreds of guests would gather for the harvest festival celebration. Whatever action he decided to take, it would have to be swift and decisive. Marcus opened his desk drawer and retrieved his secure communication device, an encrypted phone that connected directly to key members of the royal household staff. His finger hovered over the contact for Lord Chancellor Harrison, the king's chief advisor and the person responsible for maintaining royal protocols. Harrison would know the proper procedures for addressing this situation, and he would have the authority to investigate without creating a public scandal. But before Marcus could place the call, another possibility occurred to him. What if Princess Charlotte didn't know about the ring's transfer? What if her stepmother had taken the ring without permission, planning to return it before anyone noticed? The thought made Marcus's jaw clench with barely controlled anger. The princess had already lost so much: her mother, her position as the only child in the royal household, and now potentially a cherished symbol of her heritage. Marcus had watched Princess Charlotte grow from a grieving 12-year-old into a remarkable young woman. He had seen her struggle with the introduction of her stepfamily, had observed her efforts to maintain her dignity while navigating the complex politics of the royal household. The idea that someone might be taking advantage of her trusting nature or exploiting her position filled Marcus with a protective fury that surprised him with its intensity. The sapphire ring represented more than just Charlotte's royal heritage. It was one of the last tangible connections to her deceased mother. Queen Margaret had worn the ring on her wedding day, during Charlotte's christening, and at countless other significant moments in their family's history. For that ring to be casually given to Evangeline felt like a desecration of Queen Margaret's memory and a theft of Charlotte's birthright. As the afternoon shadows grew longer, Marcus found himself pacing his office like a caged animal. The rational part of his mind urged caution and proper procedures, but a deeper instinct demanded immediate action. He had sworn an oath to protect the royal family and their interests, and that oath extended to protecting them from threats both external and internal. The sound of laughter drifted through his window from the castle gardens, where early arriving guests were taking pre-dinner refreshments. The normalcy of the scene contrasted sharply with the turmoil in Marcus's mind. In just a few hours, Evangeline would be wearing the stolen ring in front of hundreds of nobles and dignitaries, flaunting a symbol of royal heritage that didn't belong to her. Marcus made his decision. He would attend the celebration not as a passive observer, but as an active guardian of royal tradition. If Evangeline appeared at the dinner wearing the sapphire ring of Aldermere, he would take action to reclaim it, regardless of the personal consequences. The ring belonged to Princess Charlotte, and by extension, to the people of Aldermere who looked to the royal family as symbols of continuity and legitimate authority. As the sun set over the castle towers, casting the stone walls in shades of gold and crimson, Marcus prepared for what might be the most challenging night of his career. He checked his dress uniform, ensuring every detail was perfect, and reviewed the evening's security arrangements one final time. But underneath his professional preparations, anger burned like a slow fuse, waiting for the moment when it would finally explode into action. The stage was set for a confrontation that would shake the very foundations of the royal household and expose secrets that had been carefully hidden for years. In the great hall below, servants lit candles and arranged flowers, unaware that they were preparing the setting for a scandal that would change everything. The Harvest Festival celebration, intended to showcase the kingdom's prosperity and the royal family's unity, was about to become the backdrop for a revelation that would threaten to tear the monarchy apart. The Great Hall of Aldermere Castle had been transformed into a vision of autumn splendor. Enormous chandeliers cast warm light over tables draped in deep burgundy cloth, while arrangements of golden wheat, crimson maple leaves, and purple grapes created a celebration of the harvest season. The walls, normally adorned with formal portraits and royal standards, now featured tapestries depicting scenes of abundance and prosperity throughout the kingdom. Commander Marcus Blackwood took his position near the main entrance, his eyes scanning the assembled guests with the practiced vigilance of a man whose life revolved around spotting potential threats. Tonight, however, his greatest concern wasn't an assassin or political agitator. It was a young woman wearing stolen jewelry and the family members who had enabled her theft. The guest list read like a catalog of Aldermere's most influential families. Dukes and duchesses from the outer provinces had traveled for days to attend the celebration, bringing with them their own retinues of advisors, merchants, and minor nobles hoping to advance their standing in royal society. The economic importance of the Harvest Festival couldn't be overstated. Trade agreements would be negotiated, political alliances strengthened, and the kingdom's prosperity displayed for all to see. King Edmund entered the hall with the bearing of a ruler who had governed wisely for nearly 2 decades. At 52, he retained the strong features and commanding presence that had made him a successful military leader before ascending to the throne. His dark hair was now touched with silver at the temples, and the weight of crown had added lines around his eyes, but his authority remained unquestionable. Tonight he wore the formal royal blue uniform reserved for state occasions, complete with the ceremonial sword that had belonged to his father. Behind the king walked Queen Consort Isabella, resplendent in a gown of deep purple silk that accentuated her refined features and graceful bearing. At 43, Isabella possessed the sophisticated beauty and political acumen that had made her an ideal choice for a royal marriage. Her blonde hair was arranged in an elaborate style befitting her position, and around her neck she wore the traditional sapphire necklace that complemented the royal crown jewels. Marcus's attention focused intently on Isabella's hands, but he saw only her wedding ring and a pair of elegant diamond bracelets. No sign of the sapphire ring of Aldermere, which meant either she had never possessed it to give away, or she was being deliberately careful about her own jewelry choices this evening. Princess Charlotte followed several steps behind her stepmother, and Marcus felt a surge of protective pride as he watched her navigate the formal entrance. At 21, Charlotte had grown into a striking young woman who combined her mother's ethereal beauty with her father's strength of character. Her gown was a masterpiece of royal fashion, midnight blue silk embroidered with silver threads that caught the candlelight with every movement. Her dark hair fell in elegant waves around her shoulders, and she wore Queen Margaret's pearl necklace, a cherished heirloom from her mother's family. Most importantly, Marcus noted with satisfaction, Charlotte's hands bore only simple rings, nothing that resembled the ancient sapphire piece that should rightfully have adorned her fingers at such a significant royal event. The absence of the ring on Charlotte's hand confirmed Marcus's worst fears about the situation. The princess moved through the crowd with practiced grace, accepting greetings from nobles and dignitaries with the perfect balance of warmth and royal dignity. Marcus had watched her develop these skills over the years, transforming from a shy, grieving child into a confident representative of the crown. Her charity work had made her particularly popular among the common people, and several guests tonight represented organizations that had benefited from her patronage. As the formal presentations continued, Marcus positioned himself to observe Lady Evangeline's entrance. When she finally appeared in the doorway, conversation momentarily ceased as guests took in her appearance. The emerald gown he had seen her wearing that morning had been replaced by something even more stunning, a creation of ivory silk and gold embroidery that made her auburn hair gleam like burnished copper in the candlelight. And there, unmistakably visible on her right hand, was the sapphire ring of Aldermere. Marcus felt his carefully maintained composure crack as he watched Evangeline glide into the hall, the stolen ring catching the light with every gesture she made. The audacity of wearing the piece so publicly, in front of the very people who would recognize its significance, struck Marcus as either incredibly naive or deliberately provocative. Either way, it represented a violation of royal tradition that demanded immediate action. Evangeline took her place at the royal table, positioned between minor nobility in a way that acknowledged her place in the royal household without granting her any official rank. As a stepdaughter of the king, she occupied a unique position, welcomed into royal society, but forever excluded from the line of succession or any real political power. Tonight, however, the ring on her finger suggested she was claiming a heritage that didn't belong to her. The formal dinner proceeded according to ancient protocol, with multiple courses served on gold plates while musicians played traditional melodies from the gallery above. Conversation flowed around topics of trade, harvest yields, and political developments in neighboring kingdoms. Marcus maintained his professional vigilance, but his attention kept returning to the sapphire ring that gleamed mockingly from Evangeline's hand. During the third course, Marcus noticed Princess Charlotte's gaze fall upon her stepsister's jewelry. Even from across the room, Marcus could see the moment of recognition and the flash of emotion that crossed Charlotte's features. Her training in royal deportment prevented any obvious reaction, but Marcus caught the slight tightening around her eyes and the way her hand unconsciously moved to touch the pearl necklace at her throat. The sight of Charlotte's pain cut through Marcus like a blade. Here was a young woman who had already endured the loss of her mother and the complications of her father's remarriage, now discovering that a precious family heirloom had been given to someone with no claim to it. The ring represented not just royal tradition, but a direct connection to Queen Margaret and the heritage that Charlotte would one day pass to her own children. Lord Chancellor Harrison, seated at the high table near the king, seemed oblivious to the drama unfolding around the jewelry. As the chief administrator of royal protocol, Harrison should have been the first to notice and address such a violation. His failure to act suggested either shocking incompetence or, more disturbingly, possible complicity in whatever scheme had led to the ring's unauthorized transfer. Marcus's military training had taught him to analyze tactical situations quickly and decisively. As he observed the dinner party, several possibilities crystallized in his mind. First, Queen Consort Isabella had taken the ring without permission and given it to her daughter, possibly as a gesture of inclusion or status enhancement. Second, King Edmund had authorized the transfer, but failed to inform the appropriate staff, creating a protocol nightmare. Third, and most troubling, the ring had been stolen outright, with the dinner party serving as a brazen display of the thief confidence. The conversation around the royal table grew more animated as the evening progressed, and the wine flowed more freely. Marcus caught fragments of discussion about upcoming winter festivals, proposed trade expeditions, and various noble families' marriage prospects. The normalcy of these topics contrasted sharply with the crisis that Marcus perceived developing around the unauthorized jewelry. As dessert was served, Princess Charlotte excused herself from the table, ostensibly to greet some of the younger guests who had arrived later in the evening. Marcus watched her move through the crowd, accepting compliments on her appearance and engaging in the diplomatic small talk that formed the backbone of royal social events. However, he noticed that she carefully avoided approaching the section of the hall where Evangeline was holding court among a group of minor nobles. The avoidance was subtle but deliberate, and Marcus realized that Charlotte was probably struggling with her own emotions about discovering the ring on her stepsister's finger. The princess's composure was admirable, but Marcus could see the strain in the slight tension of her shoulders and the way she kept her hands clasped behind her back, away from public view. Marcus made a decision that would later prove pivotal to the evening's events. He approached Lord Chancellor Harrison during a lull in the formal presentations, timing his movement to coincide with a particularly loud burst of laughter from a nearby table. "Lord Chancellor," Marcus said quietly, "might I have a word about this evening's security arrangements?" Harrison, a tall man with graying hair and the bearing of someone comfortable with authority, nodded absently. "Of course, Commander. Though I trust everything is proceeding smoothly, there's a matter regarding royal jewelry that requires your immediate attention," Marcus said, keeping his voice low, but allowing a note of urgency to creep in. Harrison's expression sharpened. As the keeper of royal protocols, any issue with crown jewels fell directly under his jurisdiction. "What sort of matter?" Marcus glanced around to ensure they weren't being overheard, then spoke with careful precision. "The sapphire ring of Aldermere is currently being worn by Lady Evangeline. I have no record of authorization for this jewelry assignment." The Lord Chancellor's face went pale. He understood the implications immediately. "Are you certain it's the authentic piece?" "Absolutely certain, sir. I've overseen its security for numerous events over the past decade. There's no mistaking that ring." Harrison's eyes quickly scanned the crowd until they located Evangeline, still chatting animatedly with her admirers. Even from a distance, the sapphires were unmistakable under the ballroom's brilliant illumination. "This is highly irregular," Harrison muttered, more to himself than to Marcus. "The ring should be secured in the vault unless worn by Princess Charlotte during formal ceremonies." "My thoughts exactly, sir. How would you like me to proceed?" Harrison was quiet for a long moment, clearly weighing the political implications of various responses. A public confrontation would embarrass the royal family and potentially create a scandal that could damage the monarchy's reputation. However, allowing the unauthorized use of royal jewelry to continue unchallenged would set a dangerous precedent and undermine the very traditions that legitimized royal authority. "I need to speak with His Majesty immediately," Harrison finally decided. "Can you maintain discretion until I've had a chance to address this matter through proper channels?" Marcus nodded, though internally he was growing impatient with the political calculations that seemed to take precedence over protecting royal property. "Of course, Lord Chancellor. However, I should point out that every moment Lady Evangeline wears that ring publicly, we risk additional complications." "Understood. Give me 30 minutes to speak with the king privately." As Harrison moved away to seek a private audience with King Edmund, Marcus returned to his security station, but his focus remained fixed on the sapphire ring that continued to gleam mockingly from Evangeline's finger. The young woman seemed completely at ease, laughing and conversing as if she had every right to wear a piece that represented 3 centuries of royal heritage. The clock on the Great Hall's mantelpiece chimed 10 o'clock, marking the traditional time for formal toasts and speeches. King Edmund rose from his seat, and the entire hall fell silent as guests prepared for the ceremonial portion of the evening. The king's speech would typically cover the kingdom's prosperity, gratitude for the harvest, and hopes for the coming year. As King Edmund began to speak about the traditions that bound the kingdom together and the importance of honoring the past while building for the future, Marcus felt the irony of the moment acutely. Here was the monarch speaking about respect for tradition, while his stepdaughter brazenly wore stolen royal jewelry just meters away. Princess Charlotte applauded politely during her father's speech, but Marcus noticed that her gaze occasionally drifted to Evangeline's table. The princess was clearly aware of the ring's presence, and struggling with the knowledge that something precious to her family's heritage was being displayed by someone who had no legitimate claim to it. When the formal speeches concluded and the dancing began, Marcus realized that Lord Chancellor Harrison's 30 minutes had stretched far longer without any visible resolution. Either Harrison was having difficulty securing a private audience with the king, or their conversation was proving more complex than anticipated. Meanwhile, Evangeline continued to wear the ring, now using her hands expressively as she danced with various partners who requested the honor. Marcus's patience, already strained by years of watching family tensions simmer beneath the surface of royal public life, finally reached its breaking point. His loyalty to Princess Charlotte, combined with his oath to protect royal property, demanded action. The proper channels had failed to produce results, and every moment of delay risked further damage to royal tradition and Charlotte's rightful heritage. The time for diplomatic solutions had passed. Marcus made his way through the crowd, his jaw set with determination, and his eyes focused on the sapphire ring that had no business adorning anyone's finger except Princess Charlotte's. The explosion of anger that had been building throughout the evening was about to erupt in a way that would change everything for everyone involved. As he approached Evangeline's table, Marcus felt the weight of his decision settling on his shoulders. He was about to take action that could end his career, disgrace him publicly, and potentially damage relationships within the royal family. But some violations of trust and tradition were too serious to tolerate, regardless of the personal consequences. The final dance of the formal portion of the evening was beginning, and Evangeline was accepting another partner's invitation, the stolen ring catching the candlelight as she extended her hand. Marcus quickened his pace, knowing that in just a few moments, his carefully controlled professional demeanor would give way to the righteous fury of a man who had sworn to protect what was being stolen before his very eyes. The orchestra struck the opening notes of the traditional Aldermere waltz as couples arranged themselves on the polished marble floor of the Great Hall. This particular dance held special significance in royal protocol, as it was reserved for the most distinguished guests and typically concluded the formal portion of harvest celebrations. The movements were elegant and complex, requiring both skill and grace from the participants, making it a perfect showcase for the nobility's refined education. Commander Marcus Blackwood watched from his position near the pillared alcove as Lady Evangeline accepted the outstretched hand of Duke Morrison, one of the kingdom's wealthiest landowners and a man whose good opinion could significantly influence a young woman's social standing. The Duke was known for his appreciation of fine jewelry, and Marcus observed with growing fury how the older man's eyes were drawn to the sapphire ring adorning Evangeline's finger. The dance began with stately grace, couples moving in precise formations that had been choreographed centuries earlier. Evangeline appeared completely at ease, her emerald gown flowing elegantly as she executed the intricate steps. The stolen ring caught the light with every turn and gesture, creating flashes of blue fire that seemed to mock the very traditions the dance was meant to honor. Marcus felt his professional control slipping away like sand through his fingers. 23 years of disciplined service, of swallowing his personal opinions, and maintaining diplomatic silence in the face of royal family politics, were being eroded by the sight of that ring being displayed so casually by someone who had no right to wear it. His hands clenched into fists at his sides as he watched Evangeline laugh at something Duke Morrison whispered to her, the sapphires glinting with her animated gestures. From across the hall, Princess Charlotte stood with a group of younger nobles, maintaining the appearance of enjoying the evening's festivities while carefully avoiding direct observation of her stepsister's performance. Marcus had served the royal family long enough to read the subtle signs of emotional distress that Charlotte was working so hard to conceal. The slight tension around her eyes, the way she kept her own hands clasped behind her back, the careful control of her facial expressions, all indicated a young woman struggling with a betrayal she couldn't publicly acknowledge. The sight of Charlotte's quiet suffering proved to be the final catalyst for Marcus's erupting anger. This wasn't merely about protocol violations or proper procedure. This was about a motherless princess being robbed of her heritage by the very people who should have been protecting her interests. The ring had belonged to Charlotte's mother, had been worn by generations of royal women who had earned the right through blood and birthright. For it to be casually bestowed upon Evangeline felt like a desecration of everything the monarchy represented. As the waltz reached its midpoint, with couples executing the traditional crossing pattern that brought them close to the edge of the dance floor, Marcus made his move. He strode forward with purposeful steps, his military bearing causing guests to step aside automatically. The conversations around him seemed to fade as his focus narrowed to a single objective: reclaiming the stolen ring and confronting the theft that had been allowed to continue unchallenged. "Lady Evangeline," Marcus called out in a voice that carried clearly across the music, causing several nearby dancers to falter in their steps. Evangeline and Duke Morrison paused in their dance, turning to face the approaching commander with expressions of surprise. The music continued, but Marcus noted that other couples were beginning to slow their movements, sensing that something unusual was developing. "Commander Blackwood," Evangeline replied, her voice carrying a note of uncertainty. "Is there something wrong?" Marcus came to a halt just a few feet from the couple, close enough that his words would be audible to them, but far enough to avoid creating an immediate public scene. However, his military posture and the intensity of his expression were already drawing attention from guests throughout the immediate area. "My lady, I need to speak with you about the ring you're wearing," Marcus said, his voice controlled but carrying an undertone of steel that made Duke Morrison take a small step backward. Evangeline's free hand moved instinctively to cover the sapphire ring, a gesture that struck Marcus as an admission of guilt. "I'm sorry, Commander, but I don't understand what you mean. This is hardly the time or place for such discussions." The dismissive tone in her voice was the spark that ignited Marcus's carefully contained fury. Years of watching this young woman benefit from royal privilege while contributing nothing to the kingdom's welfare, combined with the current theft of Charlotte's heritage, culminated in an explosion of anger that shocked everyone within hearing distance. "The ring you're wearing," Marcus said, his voice rising despite his training in diplomatic discretion, "is the sapphire ring of Aldermere. It belongs to the royal crown jewels and has no business on your finger." The declaration rang out across the dance floor like a thunderclap. The orchestra continued playing for a few more measures before trailing off into confused silence as musicians became aware of the drama unfolding below them. Conversation stopped throughout the hall as guests turned to witness the unprecedented confrontation between a Royal Guard commander and a member of the royal household. Duke Morrison attempted to defuse the situation with aristocratic smoothness. "Commander, surely this matter could be discussed more privately." "No," Marcus interrupted, his military authority overriding noble privilege in a way that sent ripples of shock through the assembled aristocracy. "This matter concerns the theft of royal property and cannot be overlooked." Evangeline's face had gone pale, but she attempted to maintain her composure. "Commander Blackwood, you're creating a scene over a simple misunderstanding. The Queen Consort gave me this ring specifically for tonight's celebration." "The Queen Consort," Marcus replied with barely controlled fury, "has no authority to distribute royal heirlooms to her biological children. That ring has been worn by queens and princesses of Aldermere for 3 centuries, and it belongs to Princess Charlotte by right of blood and tradition." A gasp went up from the surrounding guests as the full implications of Marcus's accusations became clear. This wasn't merely a dispute over jewelry. This was an allegation that Queen Consort Isabella had overstepped her authority and violated the sacred traditions that governed royal property. The political ramifications were staggering. From across the hall, King Edmund had become aware of the disturbance and was moving through the crowd with Lord Chancellor Harrison at his side. Princess Charlotte remained frozen in her position, her face a mask of royal training that concealed what must have been tremendous emotional turmoil. Evangeline's composure finally cracked under the pressure of public scrutiny and Marcus's relentless accusations. "How dare you speak to me this way?" she snapped, her voice carrying clearly across the silent hall. "I'm a member of this royal household, and I won't be accused of theft by a mere servant." The word servant struck Marcus like a physical blow, not because it wounded his pride, but because it revealed the contempt that Evangeline held for the people who had dedicated their lives to protecting her family. His anger, already at dangerous levels, erupted into a fury that surprised even him with its intensity. "A servant," Marcus roared, his voice echoing off the stone walls of the great hall. "I've served this royal family with honor for 23 years. I protected your stepfather from assassins, safeguarded royal property through wars and political upheavals, and swore my life to defend the traditions you're now spitting on." The commander's explosion of anger created a circle of shocked silence around him. Guests who had never seen a royal guard display anything more emotional than professional courtesy watched in fascination and horror as Marcus confronted the royal stepdaughter with accusations that could topple governments. "That ring," Marcus continued, pointing directly at Evangeline's hand, "was worn by Queen Margaret on the day Princess Charlotte was born. It represents a heritage that goes back 3 centuries, and you have no more right to wear it than you would to sit on the throne itself." King Edmund had reached the edge of the confrontation, his face dark with royal displeasure at the public spectacle being created in his court. However, Marcus was beyond caring about diplomatic consequences. The sight of the stolen ring, combined with Evangeline's dismissive attitude toward his service, had unleashed years of suppressed frustration with the politics and compromises that governed royal life. "Commander Blackwood," King Edmund said in a voice that carried absolute authority, "you will explain yourself immediately." Marcus turned to face his sovereign, and for a moment his training reasserted itself enough for him to bow formally. However, when he straightened, his eyes blazed with uncompromising determination. "Your Majesty, the sapphire ring of Aldermere is currently being worn by Lady Evangeline without proper authorization. According to royal protocols, this ring is restricted to female members of the royal bloodline and should not have been removed from the secured vault without official documentation." King Edmund's gaze moved to Evangeline's hand, where the sapphire ring continued to gleam accusingly under the ballroom lights. The king's expression shifted from anger at the public disturbance to confusion and concern as he recognized the piece. "Evangeline," the king said carefully, "where did you obtain that ring?" Before Evangeline could answer, Queen Consort Isabella arrived on the scene, having pushed through the crowd with the determined grace of a woman accustomed to managing political crises. Her face was composed, but Marcus caught the flash of concern in her eyes as she assessed the situation. "Edmund," Isabella said smoothly, "I gave Evangeline the ring for tonight's celebration. I thought it would complement her gown beautifully, and it seemed appropriate for such a significant family gathering." The explanation hung in the air like an unexploded bomb. King Edmund's expression darkened as he realized the implications of his wife's actions. The assembled guests watched in fascinated silence, understanding that they were witnessing a royal family crisis that could reshape the kingdom's political landscape. Marcus felt a moment of vindication at having his accusations confirmed, but his anger was far from satisfied. The casual way Isabella explained her actions, as if royal heirlooms were fashion accessories to be distributed at will, only reinforced his belief that the royal family's traditions were under attack from within. "Your Majesty," Marcus said, his voice still carrying the edge of righteous fury, "with respect to the Queen Consort, that ring has specific restrictions governing its use. It has been worn exclusively by queens and princesses of royal blood since its creation 3 centuries ago. To bestow it upon anyone outside the direct bloodline violates fundamental protocols that protect the integrity of royal heritage." Isabella's eyes narrowed dangerously as she realized that Marcus was not merely challenging Evangeline's right to wear the ring, but questioning her own authority as queen consort. "Commander, you forget yourself. I am the queen, and I have every right to make decisions about royal property. You are the queen consort," Marcus corrected with a precision that cut through diplomatic niceties. "And according to the laws that govern this kingdom, certain royal artifacts are held in trust for future generations of the bloodline. You cannot simply give them away to your biological children." The brutal honesty of Marcus's words created a moment of stunned silence. He had articulated what many in the court had thought, but never dared say: that Isabella's position, while elevated, did not grant her unlimited authority over royal traditions and property. The distinction between queen by birth and queen by marriage had been thrust into the spotlight in a way that would have far-reaching consequences. Princess Charlotte, who had been watching the confrontation with growing distress, finally moved forward through the crowd. Her approach caused guests to step aside respectfully, but Marcus could see the emotional cost of her public composure. When she reached the group surrounding the stolen ring, her voice was quiet but carried clearly across the silent hall. "Father," Charlotte said, her eyes fixed on the sapphire ring that should have been hers, "that ring belonged to my mother." The simple statement carried more emotional weight than all of Marcus's formal protests. In just 7 words, Princess Charlotte had reminded everyone present that this wasn't merely about protocol violations. It was about the systematic erasure of a dead queen's memory and the theft of a motherless daughter's heritage. The confrontation had reached a point where resolution would require choices that could reshape the royal family forever. Marcus's explosive anger had forced issues into the open that had been carefully hidden for years, and there would be no easy return to the previous status quo. The stolen ring gleamed mockingly in the ballroom lights, a symbol of all the tensions and betrayals that had been building within the royal household since the day King Edmund remarried. The silence that followed Princess Charlotte's quiet declaration stretched across the great hall like a physical presence. Hundreds of Aldermere's most influential citizens stood frozen in their formal attire, wine glasses forgotten in their hands, as they witnessed a royal family crisis unfolding before their eyes. The orchestra members sat motionless in the gallery above, their instruments silent, as the drama below commanded everyone's absolute attention. King Edmund looked from his daughter to his wife, to the sapphire ring that had become the catalyst for exposing years of carefully buried family tensions. At 52, he had navigated numerous political crises during his reign, but nothing had prepared him for the complexity of managing a public confrontation that involved his wife's authority, his daughter's heritage, and the fundamental traditions that legitimized his own rule. Commander Marcus Blackwood remained at rigid attention, his military bearing intact despite the emotional storm raging within him. The explosion of anger that had driven him to this moment of confrontation was now crystallizing into a cold, determined resolve. He had crossed a line from which there could be no retreat, and he was prepared to face whatever consequences resulted from his decision to protect Princess Charlotte's rightful inheritance. Queen Consort Isabella's composed facade was beginning to show cracks under the pressure of public scrutiny and the implications of Marcus's accusations. As a woman who had spent her adult life navigating the treacherous waters of noble society, she understood that the current situation could destroy her carefully cultivated position within the royal hierarchy. Her biological daughter's possession of a royal heirloom was being challenged not just on procedural grounds, but on the fundamental question of legitimacy and belonging. Lady Evangeline stood at the center of the confrontation, her emerald gown and auburn hair making her a striking figure under the ballroom lights. However, the confidence and social ease she had displayed earlier in the evening had evaporated under the weight of Marcus's accusations and the growing awareness that she was wearing something that might have been obtained improperly. The sapphire ring on her finger seemed to grow heavier with each passing moment. Duke Morrison, caught between his desire to support the young woman he had been dancing with and his political instincts for self-preservation, took another subtle step backward. The Duke's retreat was noticed by other guests, creating a ripple effect as nobles unconsciously distanced themselves from what was rapidly becoming a scandal that could taint anyone associated with it. Princess Charlotte's presence had shifted the emotional dynamic of the confrontation from a dispute over protocol to a deeply personal family crisis. Her simple statement about the ring belonging to her mother had reminded everyone present that Queen Margaret, beloved by both the people and the nobility, was being dishonored by the casual distribution of her personal jewelry to someone outside the royal bloodline. Lord Chancellor Harrison, who had failed to resolve the situation through discreet channels, now found himself forced to address the crisis publicly. As the keeper of royal protocols and the final authority on matters of tradition and law within the palace, his next words would carry enormous weight in determining how the situation would be resolved. "Your Majesty," Harrison began carefully, his diplomatic training evident in his measured tone. "Perhaps this matter would be better addressed in a more private setting, where we can examine the relevant protocols and documentation without the pressure of public scrutiny." King Edmund nodded slowly, recognizing the wisdom of removing the crisis from the public stage. However, before he could speak, Marcus stepped forward with the determined air of a man who had decided that diplomatic solutions had already failed. "With respect, Lord Chancellor," Marcus said, his voice carrying clearly across the silent hall, "this matter has already been allowed to fester for too long. Every moment that ring remains on Lady Evangeline's finger is another violation of royal tradition and another insult to Princess Charlotte's rightful heritage." The commander's refusal to accept a private resolution sent a shock wave through the assembled guests. Court protocol demanded that royal family disputes be handled discreetly, away from public observation. Marcus's insistence on immediate, public resolution represented a revolutionary challenge to the diplomatic practices that normally govern palace life. Isabella's composure finally cracked under the pressure of Marcus's relentless challenge to her authority. "Commander Blackwood," she said, her voice rising with royal indignation, "you are completely out of line. I am the Queen of Aldermere, and I will not be lectured about royal protocols by someone whose job is to follow orders, not question royal decisions." The assertion of absolute authority was exactly the wrong approach to take with a man whose loyalty had been forged through years of genuine service rather than political calculation. Marcus's response came with the force of suppressed frustration finally finding its voice. "You are the queen consort," Marcus replied with devastating precision, "and your authority extends only to those areas specifically granted to you by law and tradition. The distribution of royal heirlooms to your biological children is not among those authorities." The distinction hit Isabella like a physical blow. In front of hundreds of witnesses, her stepson-in-law had publicly challenged not just her specific action, but her fundamental understanding of her role within the royal hierarchy. The humiliation was compounded by the fact that Marcus's position was legally correct. Queen consorts had historically been excluded from decisions regarding hereditary royal property precisely to prevent the kind of conflict that was now unfolding. King Edmund realized that the situation was spiraling beyond his ability to control through normal diplomatic means. The public nature of the confrontation meant that any resolution would be scrutinized by every noble family in the kingdom and would set precedents that could affect royal authority for generations. "Enough," the king commanded, his voice carrying the full weight of royal authority. "This discussion will continue in private. Guards, please clear the hall of all guests except immediate family members and senior palace officials." The order created a flurry of activity as royal guards began the complex process of diplomatically escorting hundreds of distinguished guests from the hall while maintaining the appearance of normal social courtesy. However, the damage to royal prestige had already been done. Every person leaving the hall had witnessed a royal family in crisis, with fundamental questions about authority and legitimacy being debated publicly. As the guests departed, conversations buzzed with speculation about what they had witnessed. Duke Morrison paused near Marcus, his expression thoughtful. "Commander," he said quietly, "you've served this family with distinction for many years. I hope you've considered the full implications of your actions tonight." Marcus met the Duke's gaze steadily. "I've considered them very carefully, Your Grace. Some principles are worth the personal cost of defending them." The Duke nodded slowly, then departed with the rest of the guests, leaving behind a hall that felt enormous and empty despite the small group of people remaining. The grandeur of the harvest decorations now seemed somehow mocking, as if the celebration of tradition and abundance had been transformed into a stage for the exposure of family dysfunction and violated trust. When only the royal family, Lord Chancellor Harrison, and a few senior palace officials remained, King Edmund moved to address the crisis that could no longer be ignored or diplomatically managed. The informal grouping that formed in the center of the Great Hall looked insignificant in the vast space, but their conversation would determine the future of royal tradition and family relationships. "Isabella," King Edmund began, his voice heavy with the weight of his position, "explain to me how you came to possess the sapphire ring of Aldermere, and why you believed you had the authority to give it to Evangeline." Isabella straightened, drawing upon years of experience in managing difficult political situations. The ring was in my personal jewelry collection. I assumed it had been placed there as part of my royal accessories when I married you. When Evangeline admired it last week, it seemed natural to let her wear it for tonight's celebration. The explanation revealed either shocking ignorance of royal protocols or a deliberate attempt to obscure the truth. Lord Chancellor Harrison's expression darkened as he realized the implications of Isabella's claim. "Your Majesty," Harrison said carefully, "the Queen Consort's personal jewelry collection consists entirely of pieces specifically designated for her use. The sapphire ring of Aldermere has never been part of that collection. It has always been maintained in the restricted vault reserved for hereditary pieces belonging to the direct royal bloodline." Isabella's face flushed as she realized that her explanation had only made the situation worse. If the ring had never been legitimately in her possession, then her gift to Evangeline was not merely inappropriate. It was theft. Princess Charlotte, who had remained silent during the adult conversation, finally spoke with quiet intensity. "Isabella, that ring was the last piece of jewelry my mother wore before she died. She was holding it when she told me stories about the queens who wore it before her. You had no right to take it, and you certainly had no right to give it away." The personal dimension of Charlotte's loss transformed the crisis from a matter of protocol into something far more devastating. Isabella had not merely violated royal tradition. She had desecrated the memory of a beloved queen and stolen irreplaceable personal mementos from her grieving daughter. Evangeline, who had been struggling to remove the ring with trembling fingers, finally succeeded in sliding it from her hand. The sapphires seemed to catch the candlelight one last time before she extended the ring toward Princess Charlotte with a gesture that acknowledged both defeat and, perhaps, a belated understanding of what she had been wearing. "Charlotte," Evangeline said quietly, "I'm sorry. I didn't understand what the ring meant to you and your mother's memory." Charlotte accepted the ring with hands that shook slightly, cradling it as if it were a living thing that had been rescued from danger. The moment of return was witnessed by everyone present, but it felt intensely private. A daughter reclaiming her heritage and her connection to a mother who could never be replaced. Marcus watched the exchange with satisfaction, but he knew that returning the ring was only the first step in addressing the larger issues that the evening's events had exposed. The trust between family members had been shattered, royal protocols had been violated, and questions about authority and legitimacy had been raised that would require careful resolution. King Edmund looked around the circle of family members and advisors, his expression grave as he contemplated the work that would be required to repair the damage done to both family relationships and royal authority. The harvest celebration that was intended to showcase unity and prosperity had instead become the catalyst for exposing fractures that ran deep within the royal household. The crisis was far from over, and the choices made in the coming days would determine whether the royal family could heal from the wounds that had been opened or whether the confrontation over a single ring would lead to permanent divisions that could threaten the stability of the monarchy itself. 3 days after the explosive confrontation at the Harvest Festival, Aldermere Castle seemed to exist in a state of suspended animation. The grand halls that had recently echoed with music and laughter now felt oppressive and heavy with unspoken tensions. Servants moved through their duties with unusual quiet, instinctively understanding that the royal household was navigating a crisis that could reshape everything they had known about palace life. Commander Marcus Blackwood sat in his office, staring at the formal disciplinary notice that lay on his desk like a coiled serpent. The document, bearing Lord Chancellor Harrison's official seal, outlined charges of insubordination, breach of protocol, and public disruption of a royal function. The recommended punishment was immediate dismissal from royal service and forfeiture of all benefits earned through 23 years of distinguished duty. The irony was not lost on Marcus that his successful protection of royal property and tradition had resulted in his own professional destruction. However, as he gazed at the disciplinary notice, he felt no regret for his actions. The sapphire ring of Aldermere now rested safely in Princess Charlotte's possession, where it belonged, and the truth about Queen Consort Isabella's unauthorized appropriation of royal heritage had been exposed for all to see. A soft knock on his office door interrupted Marcus's contemplation. "Enter," he called, expecting to see one of his subordinate officers or perhaps a palace administrator delivering additional documentation related to his dismissal. Instead, Princess Charlotte stepped into the office, her presence immediately transforming the sterile administrative space into something that felt warm and significant. At 21, she had inherited her mother's grace and her father's strength of character, but the events of recent days had added a new depth to her bearing that spoke of someone who had faced betrayal and emerged with clearer understanding of her own values. "Your Royal Highness," Marcus said, rising immediately and offering a formal bow that felt inadequate to express his complex feelings about their shared experience. "Please sit, Commander," Charlotte replied, settling into the chair across from his desk with the easy confidence of someone comfortable with her own authority. "I wanted to speak with you privately before any final decisions are made about your future." Marcus resumed his seat, noting that Charlotte's visit was informal enough that she had not brought any attendants or guards. This was a personal conversation, not an official royal audience, and the distinction suggested that she had things to say that could not be shared through normal palace channels. "I've come to thank you," Charlotte began, her voice carrying the sincerity that had made her beloved among both nobility and common people. "What you did at the Harvest Festival required tremendous courage, and I want you to know that your actions meant everything to me." The gratitude in her voice struck Marcus more powerfully than any royal commendation or official recognition could have. This was why he had dedicated his life to royal service, not for personal advancement or political advantage, but to protect people who deserve protection and to preserve traditions that gave meaning to an entire kingdom. "Your Highness," Marcus replied carefully, "I simply did what I believed was necessary to protect your rightful inheritance. The ring belonged to you by every law and tradition that governs royal property." Charlotte nodded, then reached into her small handbag and withdrew the sapphire ring of Aldermere. Even in the subdued lighting of Marcus's office, the stones caught the available light and created small flashes of blue fire that seemed to dance with their own inner life. "This ring represents more than jewelry or even royal tradition," Charlotte said, holding the piece gently in her palms. "It's my last physical connection to my mother and to the queens who came before her. When I saw it on Evangeline's finger, I felt like I was watching my family's history being stolen and distributed to people who had no understanding of its significance." Marcus understood the deeper meaning behind Charlotte's words. The ring was not merely valuable. It was irreplaceable, carrying emotional and historical weight that could not be quantified in monetary terms. Isabella's casual gift of the piece to her biological daughter had represented something far more devastating than theft. It had been an attempt to rewrite royal history and legitimacy. "What troubles me most," Charlotte continued, "is that Isabella clearly believed she had the right to make such decisions. Either she was ignorant of royal protocols, which suggests dangerous incompetence, or she deliberately chose to violate them, which suggests something far worse. The princess's analysis revealed a sophisticated understanding of the political implications surrounding the ring incident. Charlotte was not merely a wounded daughter seeking emotional comfort. She was a future queen beginning to grapple with questions of authority and legitimacy that would define her eventual reign. Marcus chose his words carefully, understanding that his response could influence Charlotte's perspective on family relationships and royal governance for years to come. Your Highness, in my experience, people sometimes make poor decisions when they feel insecure about their position or when they prioritize immediate emotional rewards over long-term consequences. Charlotte considered this diplomatic assessment, then surprised Marcus with the directness of her next question. Do you believe Isabella took the ring deliberately, or do you think she genuinely didn't understand the restrictions governing its use? The question forced Marcus to confront his own assumptions about Isabella's motivations. His anger during the confrontation had been fueled by the belief that the queen consort had deliberately violated royal protocols, but reflection had introduced some uncertainty about her actual intentions. I believe, Marcus said slowly, that Queen Consort Isabella understood the ring's significance, but chose to interpret her authority more broadly than tradition allows. Whether that represents deliberate theft or misguided generosity is something only she can answer. Charlotte absorbed this assessment, her expression thoughtful. Father has been meeting with legal advisors and protocol experts for the past 3 days, trying to determine the appropriate response to what happened. The challenge is that any action taken against Isabella will have far-reaching consequences for the stability of the royal marriage and the kingdom's political alliances. Marcus understood the complexity of King Edmund's position. Isabella's family connections provided important political support for the crown, and any public punishment of the queen consort could destabilize those relationships. However, failing to address the protocol violations would set dangerous precedents and potentially undermine the traditional protections that governed royal heritage. What does your father intend to do about my situation? Marcus asked, gesturing toward the disciplinary notice on his desk. Charlotte's expression hardened slightly, revealing steel beneath her diplomatic training. That's actually why I'm here. Father is under pressure from Isabella to dismiss you as punishment for publicly embarrassing the royal family. She's argued that your outburst created a scandal that damaged the monarchy's reputation. The revelation confirmed Marcus's expectations about Isabella's response to being challenged publicly. Rather than acknowledging her mistakes or accepting responsibility for the protocol violations, she was attempting to deflect blame onto the person who had exposed her actions. However, Charlotte continued, I've made it clear to Father that dismissing you would be a grave injustice. You are protecting royal property and upholding the very traditions that give our family legitimacy. Punishing you for doing your job would send a terrible message about the crown's commitment to its own principles. Marcus felt a surge of gratitude for Charlotte's support, but he also recognized the difficult position her advocacy created within the royal family. By defending him, she was implicitly criticizing her stepmother and potentially straining her relationship with her father. Your Highness, Marcus said carefully, while I appreciate your support more than I can express, I don't want my situation to create additional family tensions. If my dismissal would help resolve the larger crisis, I'm prepared to accept that outcome. Charlotte's response came with surprising intensity. Absolutely not. Commander, you've served this family with distinction for over 2 decades. You've protected my father from genuine threats, safeguarded royal property, and maintained traditions that preserve the monarchy's authority. I will not allow you to be sacrificed to protect someone who violated those very traditions. The passion in Charlotte's voice revealed the depth of her feelings about both the ring incident and the broader questions of justice and responsibility it had raised. Marcus realized that his confrontation with Evangeline had catalyzed something significant in the princess's development as a future ruler, a willingness to take stands on principle even when doing so created personal and political costs. What resolution do you envision? Marcus asked, recognizing that Charlotte had clearly thought through various options for addressing the complex situation. Father is announcing several decisions tomorrow morning, Charlotte replied. First, new protocols will be established for the handling of hereditary royal jewelry, with specific restrictions that prevent any confusion about authority and access. Second, Isabella will publicly acknowledge that she made an error in judgment regarding the ring, though the specific language is still being negotiated. Marcus nodded, recognizing the political wisdom of addressing the protocol gaps that had allowed the incident to occur while providing Isabella with a face-saving way to acknowledge responsibility. And regarding your situation, Charlotte continued, Father has agreed to commute your dismissal to a formal reprimand, contingent on your acceptance of a new position within the royal household. The unexpected offer of continued service surprised Marcus, who had resigned himself to the end of his career in royal protection. What sort of new position? Charlotte's expression shifted to something that might have been amusement. You would become my personal security advisor, responsible for protecting both my physical safety and my legitimate interests as heir to the throne. The position would involve advising me on matters of protocol, tradition, and the preservation of royal heritage. Marcus understood immediately that this was not merely a job offer. It was Charlotte's way of ensuring that she would have an advocate who understood the importance of royal tradition and who had already demonstrated willingness to defend her interests even at personal cost. It would be an honor to serve in that capacity, Your Highness. Marcus replied formally, though privately he felt relief and gratitude that threatened to overwhelm his professional composure. There's one more thing, Charlotte said, rising from her chair and moving toward the office window that overlooked the castle gardens. Evangeline has asked to speak with you privately. She wants to apologize for her role in the incident and to thank you for ultimately protecting something that belonged to my mother's memory. The request surprised Marcus, who had expected Evangeline to view him as the cause of her public humiliation rather than someone who had acted appropriately under difficult circumstances. I'm willing to meet with Lady Evangeline, Marcus said carefully, though I hope she understands that my actions were not directed at her personally, but at the inappropriate use of royal property. Charlotte nodded approvingly. That's exactly what she needs to hear. Despite everything that's happened, Evangeline is still part of our family, and finding a way for everyone to move forward constructively is important for long-term harmony. As Charlotte prepared to leave, Marcus felt compelled to address one final concern. Your Highness, how will this incident affect your relationship with Queen Consort Isabella? I would hate for my actions to create permanent divisions within your family. Charlotte paused at the door, her expression thoughtful. Isabella and I have never had an easy relationship, but recent events have clarified some important boundaries. She understands now that there are limits to her authority within the royal household, and I've learned that I need to be more active in protecting my legitimate interests. The maturity and political sophistication evident in Charlotte's response suggested that she had emerged from the ring crisis with greater clarity about her own role and responsibilities as a future queen. The painful experience of seeing her heritage threatened had catalyzed important growth in her understanding of royal authority and family dynamics. Thank you for everything you've done, Commander, Charlotte said as she reached for the door handle. Your loyalty to royal tradition and your willingness to defend what was right, regardless of personal cost, embody the very best qualities of service to the crown. After Charlotte departed, Marcus sat quietly in his office, contemplating the remarkable transformation that had occurred in just 3 days. The explosive confrontation that had threatened to end his career had instead led to a new position with greater responsibilities and the personal gratitude of the future queen. More importantly, the incident had clarified important principles about royal authority and heritage that would protect future generations from similar violations. The sapphire ring of Aldermere now rested safely with its rightful owner. The protocols governing royal jewelry had been strengthened, and the relationship between family members had been redefined in ways that acknowledged both hierarchy and individual rights. The harvest celebration that had begun as a showcase of tradition and unity had ultimately served its intended purpose, though through a path that no one could have anticipated. As evening fell over Aldermere Castle, Marcus reflected on the lessons learned through crisis and confrontation. Sometimes protecting what mattered most required accepting significant personal risk. Sometimes loyalty demanded challenging authority, and sometimes explosive anger, properly channeled, could serve justice better than diplomatic silence. The Sapphire Ring incident would become a defining moment in royal history, remembered as the time when a loyal guard's fury exposed family secrets and ultimately strengthened the monarchy by clarifying its traditions and values. In defending Princess Charlotte's heritage, Marcus had not only preserved a piece of jewelry, he had protected the very principles that gave the royal family their legitimacy and their claim to the people's loyalty. The kingdom of Aldermere would emerge stronger from the crisis, with clearer understanding of royal authority, better protections for hereditary property, and renewed appreciation for the servants who dedicated their lives to preserving the traditions that connected past, present, and future generations of royal leadership.